Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Identity Mind's webinar on the path to adoption for KYC. We're going to wait for another couple of minutes to let some other folks join us, and we'll start shortly. Alrighty. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, welcome to Identity Mind webinar on KYC and the path to adoption. First off, I wanted to do some logistics and housekeeping. We will answer questions at the end, unless we see that the question is relevant to what we're saying at the moment. Everybody will be muted. Obviously, you can find a chat function so you can ask your questions. There's actually a chat. There is also questions, I believe, section in here. So feel free to start adding your questions there, and we'll get to it. And if not, then we'll reach out after the webinar with it. We will make both the slides and the recording available to the participants of the webinar, and after this. Alrighty. So with that, let me introduce you the main speaker today, which is going to be Hannah Alonso. She's been working with Identity Mind as a product manager for a few years. She was a former client of ours, and she was basically the equivalent to the BSA director for a company that was doing crypto. She has worked with us she's from our office in Latin America, in Mexico, and she's worked with many clients in the KYC world. So she's one of the main doers here of things. So actually she does stuff, I just talk. Myself, I'm the Chief Product Officer for Acquien and Identity Mind. As you may have heard, Acquien fully acquired Identity Mind recently. So we're part of the Acquien family now. We will continue to support the same Identity Mind products and the same things that we've been doing. I've been doing this for a long time. I was one of the co-founders of Identity Mind. So any questions you may have, we can answer during today's panel. All righty, so let's get into the actual webinar today. I wanted to leave you with some thoughts as we go into the details of the webinar, right? One of the main ideas and one of the things that we do well with our client base is to help them automate their KYC process. And in general, most KYC processes can actually, with the technology, can actually be quite automated. And we'll talk about what that looks like. You can automate a lot of things, going from document validation to authentication to validation of data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Technologies in general, like Identity Mind, and we sort of label in a way as a RegTech type of technology. And in the idea of technologies like ours and platforms like ours, and there are others obviously, their aim is really to see how we can help clients to operationalize and to achieve efficiencies during the onboarding processes, during your CIP program, as part of your AML program, and how you can leverage those technologies. How can you leverage the use of data in the cloud and modeling and machine learning and AI and so forth. So the idea of platforms like ours is that it enables you to give you and gives you the tools to do not only the validation of identities and the risk assessment of identities, but also the workflows that goes along with it. At the end of the day, KYC is really about the process. There's no magic, there's no silver bullet here. There's no, oh, I just bought this technology and suddenly magically everything happened. That's not how it works. The way that it works, there's a process. You have to go through the process. You have a KYC, you have a CIP part of your AML program, you have an enhanced due diligence responsibilities, you have a step of authentication, you have many things. So no technology that you just buy is going to solve all these things for you without going through the process of doing it. So this webinar is really about the process. It's about what it would take to implement a technology like ours, right? And what are the steps that you need to follow to go through that? We're going to cover some examples of some of our clients that have gone through this process with us. This is a process that we have offered to our clients, and some clients have gone through it, some clients have not. It's not 100% that you need to go through it, but for those of you that are looking to understand how to then adopt technologies like ours, I think this would give you a good understanding of how you go through that process. So with that, I am going to let Hannah actually do the talking and the content of the webinar. Hannah?
Thank you, Jose. So, all right. Like Jose mentioned, the process is extremely important whenever you're planning to integrate a technology like ours. And in order to assure a smooth implementation path to our technology with our clients, we have identified 3 different phases that we go through together with their teams to guarantee an optimal adoption of the system. So we have identified these 3 phases as inventory, that's step 1. Second one is digitize, and finally operationalize. So on the first step, the idea is to make an inventory of the use cases of your company, right? So it's basically a creation of a catalog where all of your use cases are listed. Basically what you care about in a KYC process. We nail them down so that later we can go through and transform these use cases into a data flow to the system, which basically takes us to our second phase, which is digitize. And Jose, can we go back to the previous 3 circle steps once, please? The previous one. Perfect. Thank you. So on phase 2, this step, digitize, is all about writing down all of the data that is needed to process the use cases that were collected on step 1. So this phase represents the connection between the use cases and the Identity Mine API. So in other words, it's just turning the cases into a digital form. So we go from listing the use cases, the digitalization of those, and the last phase, operationalize. It means that we start converting them into something that you can look at. So basically a conversion of the previous steps into our own technology. So this phase will help us take everything that we did before into the next level. So not only we operationalize your use cases, but we also work on how can we make your workflow more efficient so that it becomes part of your day-to-day operations. And before jumping in deeper into each of these 3 phases, I just want to give you a quick example of a KYC use case and how each of these phases is represented in it. So on to the next slide. Okay, so here we represent the 3-step process that we mentioned before: inventory, digitize, and operationalize into a KYC use case workflow. So in this example, on the top, as you can see, is a step-up validation. So here we're displaying the use case, right? So this was extracted from the first step. So the inventory of your use cases. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with what does a step-up validation KYC use case is, but basically this type of validation is a great way to find balance between security, regulation, and friction, right? So it ensures that your users can access some resources of your services with certain level of authentication. But at the moment when the user wants to transact more or access the new product, then you ask for further information. So you pass them from a stage 1 to a stage 2. So that way you allow the client to sign up and maybe send a small amount of money to other clients. But at the moment when the client reaches a certain amount of threshold, then you collect further data and run more checks on these users' accounts. This is a very common practice within many companies because it allows less friction and helps you acquire a higher number of new users. So anyways, going back to our steps, the first one, this step of validation KYC process was extracted from the first phase, the client's inventory or catalog of their use cases. Second, as you can see in the image, the bullet points below illustrate which tests are required or which data it's needed for each section to work. So these below bullet points represent the digitized step, the second one. And lastly, our last step, operationalize. It is displayed in the boxes from the top. So we basically operationalize the process by breaking it apart into 2 different stages so that the user can automate the process and make it a day-to-day operation workflow. So in conclusion, the use case is a set of authentication when a user reaches a certain amount of dollar threshold. So this is part of the inventory phase. Then we turn that information into the data fields that you see at the bottom. We digitize them. And finally, on step 3, we operationalize by breaking into 2 different stages so that we can automate this process. Now, on to the next slide. Let's deep dive a little bit deeper on the inventory. So like I mentioned, the main purpose is to create an inventory of your use cases. But it is not only about your use cases, but also in this phase is about listing which problems you're trying to solve. So in other words, in your current KYC process, which are the main pain points that you're experiencing that automating or acquiring a new technology can help you solve. So also very important and one of the main reasons why you probably want to acquire or adopt a new technology. Also related to this point is which processes you want to start implementing. This means identifying any processes which will help you achieve things that you haven't been able to achieve before. So here, think about something that you have wanted to do, but you haven't been able to do. And now, if you have a new technology, you will have a chance to accomplish. Another very important piece of this step, of course, and one of my favorite parts, is bringing your goals into performance KPIs. So for example, we talk with our clients about how much do you want to reduce your manual review rate, what is your current rate, and where do you want to get it to by automating the process. In addition to this point, also very important, are there any special trends within your industry that you want to start tracking or implementing within your KYC process? So identifying all of these points will allow a faster understanding on how your use cases map to your customer identification program. And now moving on to the second step or the second phase, digitize. So what is the purpose of this step? Well, it is to take a regular onboarding or any of the use cases identified in the previous steps and translate it into the Identities Minds API. How will these cases connect to our technology? So in this step, we basically transform them from, let's say, a physical state towards the digitalization of them. So do you remember on the step of authentication process from a few slides before, when a user reached out certain amount of aggregated dollar, then in that case, we had to run further checks on that specific user. Well, in this phase, we would gather everything that is needed to be sent to the system in order to accomplish that use case. So you will need to feed the system information such as the amount and the account of the user. And depending on which checks you want to run on a second stage, then you will send the data map into our API fields. So this phase will allow to map any additional business data as well that could be needed. So let's say that on step 1, you identified something that you have wanted to accomplish before, but you haven't been able to do so. Probably means that this would involve extracting extra data, and in this step, we will be able to digitize that data into the API fields. For example, let's say that you didn't do it before, but now with the technology, you want to start running API velocity checks on a client. So this means that whenever a client is trying to open different accounts from the same IP address, then you want to catch that specific case. So basically limiting the number of account creations that certain IP address can create on a specific time. You will send the data in a JSON format to our API. And because you were not collecting the data before, in this step, we will be able to address that, map it, and that way we will support this new use case. So in other words, the main goal of this phase, like the name says, it is to digitize. So transform the catalog of the use cases collected in step 1 and inserting the technology behind it through our API. This is the main way, of course, to automate your use cases and put them into a RegTech form. So now, moving on to the last step, operationalize. This is a phase where we make your process more efficiently. We take those use cases that we collected on phase 1. We have already digitized them, and now we want to make them operational. So here we will tackle how will you deal with your day-to-day operations, right? So this phase is all about leveraging the tools that the platform provides so that you can have a smoother workflow on your day-to-day processes. So for example, in your inventory phase, you identified that you want to run sanction screening periodically to all of your active users. So that was phase 1. Then on phase 2, we digitize them and map the data which is needed to run sanction screening on the platform. Now, in this final step, what we will do is we will configure the platform so that periodic testing for sanction screening is run, and also that it's run with the characteristics that your company cares about. So after this is accomplished, then now it's time to personalize and have a proper view of the results of running periodic testing, so that your team will know where to find any possible review needed after making this run. So basically, this step is related to how you deal with your day-to-day operations and the way it will be dealt in the most efficient way to do so. Right, so now that we have gone through a general example of a KYC process, I want to walk you guys through some of examples of what we have done with 2 of our clients, so that you can, so that it will help you land these ideas. So the first case, this is a peer-to-peer company. So a little bit more about this company. It is a money application that will provide a way to give or get money without sharing any personal information with each other. So basically, again, here, privacy in this specific client, privacy is something important, and it's mainly what distinguishes them from any other peer-to-peer money application. So on the next slide, we will display basically their before KYC flow, or let's say customer journey. So this slide shows their initial process before we started working with them. Of course, they already had a process set into place. They knew what they had to do on a regulatory aspect, but they wanted to automate this process. So at the moment when the user creates an account, our client only collects information to validate their phone number, right? So that's stage one, what we see at the very far left side of the slide. Now, if their client wants to continue using their service, then at a specific point, they will collect further data to investigate what they are required to do. So in the second step, they run sanction screening, they run identity validation, document verification. And as a part of their KYC process requirement, they, of course, also run periodic testing for sanction screening. So what this client was doing before IDM was validating their client's phone number in the first step. But once the user started the second step, meaning it had reached certain threshold, then their analyst would manually perform sanction screening on the OFAC side. So the client sent their name, their date of birth, and then again, an analyst would go to the OFAC side, investigate sanction screening. Same thing for social security number validation. And then they had a special team dedicated only to perform ID verification. So basically they would collect the ID, and then they will have someone reviewing if the ID looked valid, if it matched the information provided, and so on. If needed, after following these steps, then they could escalate into a supervisor, which for them was also a manual process. So as you can see, only the beginning of their KYC process was kind of automated because they didn't have to verify the phone themselves. Everything else was done manually. Now, moving to the after slide and their more in automated process, this is what we were able to work with them. So after we started working together, we were able to create a better automated process. So on step one, the inventory, we work their client's journey. And by mapping that journey, we were able also to extract the use cases. So for example, the initial sanction screening, the document verification, periodic testing for sanctions. So these were the use cases. So we extracted this during the inventory phase. Now, after we identify the use cases, on step two, and let's use sanction screening as an example, we identified when the data needed to run sanction screening in the system was collected. We mapped it out to our API fields, and then the system was configured so that sanction screening was run at the moment where the data was sent to IDM. So again, step one was going through their client's journey, extracting the use cases. Then on step two, taking again sanction screening as an example, we made sure we understood at which point they collected the data that the system needs to run sanction screening. And then we were able to map that into different stages so that the process could be automated. So that was step or phase three, the operationalized phase. So how the way their process looks like now is, as soon as the user enters the data, whatever data it is, if it's the name, if it's the social security number, their document ID, then that data is sent to IDM. So the tests are run, and if everything is clear out, then the user continues being accepted. Everything is fine. But if there's a match or a specific test fails, then they can view these results and they can investigate what is needed. And then analysts can escalate and possibly file a SAR, which again, SAR filing, in this case, was implemented to the platform. So again, it helped their flow and also the automated process. So let's say that in this specific case, the user passes stage 2, then at the moment when the client inputs any other needed data to run any of the stage 3 or stage 4 tests, then it is sent automatically again to the system. The stage is run. And of course, if the user fails at any of the following stages, then the team reviews in the interface. And after the investigation is done, they can decide if they want to accept the application, ask more information to the client, or even escalate it into a case. So during all of their stages, there's a logic flow, but now, unless there's a red flag, there is no need for an analyst to investigate a user, right? Because everything is performed automatically within our system. So it's also a great thing, not only for the analysts, because now they focus on more important things, but it's also a great and a better journey for the user, because the user is not waiting for a manual review. So if the user checks out and there's no red flags within the information the user provided, then the user can continue to transact automatically without any wait. So this also, it's not only better flow for your analysts, but in this case, it's also a better customer experience for the clients. So that's basically our peer-to-peer payment example I wanted to go through. Now moving on to the next one, a marketplace example. So for those who are not familiar with what a marketplace does, it's basically an application that allows users to buy and sell items quickly from their smartphones. So again, we see the importance of automated processes here. In this case, the application is also, of course, known because it has a great and an ease use of shipping, sending, receiving, buying, and selling. So now, the before example. So here's how their journey looked like before. So they had two different steps as well, as you can see, similar to the previous one. The first one didn't require much from the client. So basically they performed email investigation, phone investigation. After a certain threshold was met, then it's when the deeper investigation starts. So going on to the next slide, after we worked together with them, we were able to automate most of their previous manual work that was before being done by an analyst. So from the steps mentioned before, IDM was able to automate the section related to the user's payment method count, the user transaction activity, velocity, geolocation, possible collusion between two users. So again, similar to the peer-to-peer example before, now that there's a system and there's technology behind this process, then there is no need for an analyst to review applications unless there's something specific where a human needs to review a specific flag. So another important automation piece here was the escalation process. So that's what you can see at the very right side of the slide. So basically by leveraging the platform features, their escalation process in this specific case also became automated. So what this means is that after an analyst opens a case, there is a logic behind that is configured in the platform, which auto-assigns each case based on its properties and allocates it to a specific queue. So after the case is auto-assigned, then an analyst can either investigate and close the case or file a SAR. And by being integrated directly within the system, it allows them to have a smoother escalation process. And also it helps them keep track in a more certain way of how many cases have been closed, how many are still open, how many have been associated to SR being filed, and so on. So in this special case, not only the KYC process became automated, but the escalation method was automated as well. And on top of that, the client also took advantage of the analytics reports that we have in the platform. So this also helped automate the process where managers measure their own team's performance. So by having reports which are created automatically to display the performance, again, of their own teams, this task was also improved and kind of like smoothened out. So step one helped us design this diagram, including all of their use cases. Then step two helped us identify which data was collected and when it was collected in order to divide their KYC journey into stages. And finally, operationalize by making sure they adopted the platform and the platform also adopted their use cases within their day-to-day operations. So I think that now you can have a more concrete idea on how each of the phases could fall into within an implementation path with IDM. So I hope I was able to illustrate the importance of following the initial steps. Also, I'm sure that now you have an idea on how straightforward this process can be. So again, creating an inventory of your use cases to make sure they are all transformed into the system, coding your information through the API, and finally operationalizing your use cases and helping you find the most efficient way to adopt the platform within your day-to-day work, which is of course the main purpose of an adoption plan. So now I'll hand it over to Jose so that he can walk you through the next section of our webinar.
Thank you, Hannah. Now you can have some water and that. So I wanted to just highlight a little bit of things that, you know, when we start working with some of our clients, there's always this sort of hurdles that in questions, right, that we get. And let's start with the first one. And, you know, when we go and map these processes out, and, you know, we have been doing this with certain clients of ours, and we offer this to every client. Not everyone, as I said before, goes necessarily through this process. And they're asking, well, how long does it take to do all of this, right? And typically, we're talking into a couple of months of work. Now, that depends on many things. Depends on how committed you have resources on your organization, how much you actually know about the programs and what you want to accomplish, and so forth. So in general, we have seen very, you know, highly automated processes within a couple of months. Does that mean that you stop working on it? Probably not. Probably you still need to work on it, keep working on the policies, keep adjusting, and so forth. So that's as I said before, there's no magic here. This is a process, and depending on how many tools you're using, how many of the providers within our ecosystem orchestration layer are using, depending on the type of, you know, models that you want to run for risk and so forth, all of those things matter. And how long it takes, well, it depends on all of those things before. But in general, we take about a couple of months to have a full implementation of it. Another question that we usually get is, oh, I have a process that, you know, is super convoluted and I have all these manual people working on it, and I don't think we can make it work. So we've worked with those. There's always opportunities for improvement. There's always opportunities to digitize certain areas and automate other areas. There are, you know, processes that have teams, for example, that have sort of, you know, kind of like block areas so people cannot see one part and the other. And the platform does a very good job at trying to help you accommodate those use cases. In general, we're always able to achieve high level of automation and efficiencies in that process. The other thing we hear all the time is, well, you know, I just don't have the resources that it takes to do this. And what we've done is work together with our clients in trying to prepare the case with them so they can go to the stakeholders and say, this is why we need to do this. And we'll talk a little bit about the ROI in the next slide, but it's important that you're able to present your case to the people that actually can help you build this, right? And can help you fund the internal processes that you need. You do need somebody that, depending on your size, we have solutions that are out of the box solutions for clients in terms of the KYC and user guided experience. But if you need your own user experience and you need to code that, yes, you do need developers that can actually send information through APIs, understand what that means, and so forth. But again, it's easy for us to work with you and try to explain so you can prepare a good case to your management if you need more resources. The other thing we get, and we work roughly with about 400 clients worldwide, and many of these clients in the fintech world have a client base that could be in multiple jurisdictions, right? And that always presents a challenge. So our platform is global. You can configure and have different cases for different countries and keep different analyst teams separated from country and so forth. So yes, it is. You're not going to find, kind of one platform that can do all the things, but it's pretty good in terms of accommodating different teams, accommodating different jurisdictions, accommodating different types of workflows that you can have on each one of those jurisdictions. So in general, we can always find a solution and can always work with a client on this. I'm sure there are other things, but these are kind of some of the hurdles that we hear the most as we go through this process. So at the end of the day, it's all about operational efficiencies and benefits, right? So, we had clients that have had very high manual processes of 30 to 40 minutes of investigation for KYC. We've been able to get that to 10 to 15 minutes. In most cases, again, if you have a simple and modern process, you can actually get this down to 3 to 4 minutes, right? So that's always important. We have analyst reports, performance reports, which is very important because it allows you to focus training, for example, on how do you leverage your workforce in a better way. Again, the larger your team, obviously, the more there is an opportunity to train them and to get them better and more efficient and so forth. Workflows, I would say, and I think I've said this many times before in our webinars, we've spent the last 2 or 3 years focused in workflow. How do we help your KYC process? How do we help you achieve a better efficiency? How can you make it more automated? And this is, to me, one of those areas where I feel very proud of all that we've accomplished, because at the end of the day, you really want to make sure that this achieves the KPIs that you're looking for. Less manual review, less false positive, faster reporting, and so forth. So that's really what we've been focusing on, and bringing all the tools into place to help you do that. So we've integrated, things like KYB and UBO, the verification lately. We've integrated multiple sources of identity validation. We have, now with Accurate, we have top class document validation, both for mobile and et cetera. So everything that you need really to make sure that user experience and your CIP program go together well. At the end of the day, again, automation, how you can do this better, the SAR information and how to file regulatory reporting is very important to us. We have filings, and they file SARs every week, and it's a process. That the SAR filing functionality is very important. It requires you to work with FinCEN and so forth. So we have been doing all of this to help really our clients get there, and more important, at the end, you need to save money. That's how you're going to sell this to the people you work with. You need to do, if you are a regulated entity, you have to do KYC. There's no way you cannot do that. So because you have to do that, you have to find the balance with user experience, and you have to make sure that you can do this process efficiently, because most of you are growing, your client base, and today you may be able to deal with 100 signups a day or something like that, but you're going to grow, and it's going to be very hard for you to accommodate the growth that is going in your applications. And for those of you that have a legacy type of process, there are always room for improvement. There's always ways to achieve compliance and achieve automation at the same time to the level that is possible, right? All right. So we have many clients, very happy clients. We leave you here with some of the things that they say. In general, again, I think what our clients appreciate the most of working with us is that they have a lot of the things that they need in a single platform, that we work really hard with them to make sure the processes are efficient. And if we fall short in certain areas, we work with them to make sure that the platform evolves to the level that they need to make their processes efficiently. Okay, so with that, let's take a look at a little bit about the questions that we have in the chat. And so I am going to try to address them as we go. Yes, the presentation will be available to download. We'll follow up with an email about that later. Here's a next question here about capital markets versus private clients. And then tied to lending, I guess. So in general, the platform, and we've gone today through the KYC functionality. There is a similar, we could do the same with KYB or your business. We have partnerships with others to do accredited investors certification. So we have clients that work their accredited investment certification through our platform as well, in conjunction with some of our partners. So unless there is something more specific about the ability to work with this in capital markets, I think in general we cover the areas, the regulatory areas as it pertains to the basically to the BSA type of requirements from the AML perspective. So anything that falls within that umbrella of compliance, then we do. In terms of lending, we have many clients that do their their client verification through us in online lending. We do not do financial risk analysis, so we focus on the purpose of KYC and risk and so forth, but not from the perspective of financial risk. So other than that, we have many lending clients that work with us on this. What does PT stand for? There was I think in one of the flows we talk about periodic testing, and what that means is that the platform can periodically, and you select this, and do a certain amount of tests and screening periodically, right? So one of the most used cases for our periodic testing functionality is the sanction screening. So most of you that are regulated know that you need to perform a periodic screening of your client base against sanctions and against PEPs. So periodic testing within the platform, you configure it, and the platform would do it for itself. So every so often, however you configure it, then the system would go ahead and make sure that all your client base gets run against the updated sanctions lists or PEPs, depending on what you're doing. And the lists are updated automatically. So as soon as there are updates to OFAC or the EU freeze list or whatever, we have roughly 300 and plus different lists that get updated as we get from our sources or directly from the regulatory entities. Is this tech only for fintech? What about KYB, corporate banking, KYC, etc.? Yes, so we also have many clients on the banking and traditional financial institutions. We have a whole suite of services for Know Your Business. I would point you to we just released a guide that talks in detail about the possibilities in KYB, as well as a blog post that talks about KYB and our relationship with some of the sources there for to identify UBOs and so forth. So yes, so we do work with traditional financial institutions as well. Please explain what occurs under the sanction screening process. So basically, the system takes information from the client that is passed to the API, and it compares it to the lists that are configured either from the sanctions or the PEP's perspective. There is a set of algorithms for matching that get applied to it, so distance, phonetic, cosine, and so forth, and those can be all configured individually on a per list basis. The lists are updated, as I mentioned before, as soon, at least the sanctions one, as soon as they are published, at least in most of the jurisdictions. Others, we source the list from providers, so as soon as we get new sources, then we update those lists, so you don't have to do any of this. This is done all by the system, and then if you configure periodic testing, then those get run periodically, and you get updates and you get alerts when something changes. Once those alerts are generated, then they can be fed directly into the case management system within the platform, and then you go from there into your own sanction screening process. Any example of any automation that looked hard to implement but got solved in the end? Oh, that's a good one. Hannah, you want to take that one? You want to draw on a case that you would have thought is hard to automate, but then we were able to solve it?
Yes, absolutely. So for me, at least, it would be mainly the market. It's basically the marketplace flow that was presented on the slides before. So when we started talking to the clients, we were going through their customer journey and all of the data that they were extracting, all of the different checks that this client was performing, and it looked at the beginning as if it was something that needed so many kind of like investigation, a lot of checks, manual workflows. And after we started breaking down each, so we had the customer journey, then we identified each of the use cases during that journey, then narrowing down to data, it's when we finally started looking at some kind of like some light at the end of the tunnel and seeing how everything, if it was narrowed down to which data is going to be sent at what point, eventually, if it was configured in the system, it would, at the end of the day, end up being automated. And why I'm mentioning this process, it's because also we work together to automate not only the KYC process, which seemed really long and complicated, but also the escalation process, the performance processes for them. So at least for me, that's the main example I can think of.
Thank you, Hannah. That definitely sounds interesting. Have you run into blockers around uploading passports due to GDPR? We haven't so far. So the platform is GDPR compliant. We have got some questions about holding the data, and within the GDPR world, there are certain, I would say, I wouldn't call it exceptions, but things that you do have to comply with anti-money laundering rules too. So in general, as long as you have the proper disclosures to your clients and you have the process in place to make sure that if the client asks you to delete data and so forth, that process, you have that process in place. On our side, you could control what data gets stored in the system, and you could also tell us, hey, we need to delete this piece of the data because of GDPR concerns and so forth. And obviously, we will keep a log of that. But I think there are requirements from the regulatory perspective that actually will will help you go through that process. Again, this is not legal advice or anything like that, but in our experience, we haven't faced that issue yet, because as long as you have the tools to delete the data from the client and to record that actually that was asked from the client perspective, then I think you're covered. But again, no legal advice, things that you probably need to work with your counsel. Are there IDM groups that people can join to learn best practices? This is something that we have not done, and I think we need to do that. We need to have communities that allows our clients to share their experiences and their configurations. For now, what I would suggest is reach out to. So we have, if you are a client of ours, and I'm sorry, I don't recognize whether this person is a client of ours or not, but every client has access to what we call a CSM, which is a client success manager. And if you have questions and if you want to get in touch with other clients, perhaps that are on your own vertical or have similar problems, we could probably find that out and we probably can help you. I think it's something, again, that we should do, which is a little bit of a community that we don't have today. All right, so those are all the questions that are in the form. So with that, then I'm going to give you back, guys, about 10 more minutes of your life. Hannah, thank you so much for all the content. That was great. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. You can reach out to either the evangelist email address, or you can just simply reach out to us through our regular website, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. We'll follow up with an email that would have directions both to download the presentation and to have access to the audio. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you in the next webinar.
Thank you, everybody.